At 0530 hours on December 21st, 1944, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe stood in the frozen basement command post in Bastogne, Belgium, staring at a map that showed his position with brutal clarity. Red circles marked German units closing from every direction. The 2nd Panzer Division to the north, Panzer Lehr to the south, the 26th Volksgrenadiers Division to the east. His forces were completely surrounded. McAuliffe commanded approximately 18,000 American troops crammed into a town designed for 4,000 civilians. The 101st Airborne Division formed the corps, but attached to them were fragments of other units. Combat Command B of the 10th Armoured Division, the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, artillery units, engineers, stragglers from shattered divisions who had retreated into Bastogne ahead of the German advance. Against them, 3 full German divisions with more arriving daily. The Americans were outnumbered nearly 3-1. They had no winter clothing for most men. Temperatures were dropping to 15 degrees below 0 Celsius. Medical supplies were critically low. Ammunition was rationed. Food stocks would last perhaps 3 more days at current consumption rates. The nearest Allied reinforcements were 60 kilometers away, fighting through German lines to reach them. Every tactical principle McAuliffe had learned at West Point said this was a disaster. Getting surrounded meant getting destroyed. Everyone in the army knew that, but McAuliffe understood something the Germans did not, something that would become clear only in the next 8 days as the battle unfolded. By surrounding Bastogne, the Germans had not trapped the Americans, they had trapped themselves. They had concentrated their mobile armoured divisions around a fixed objective, where American artillery and defensive positions could systematically destroy them. They had committed forces that should have been racing west toward the Meuse River to besieging a town they could not afford to waste time capturing. And McAuliffe knew this because 2 days earlier, on December 19th, he had explained to his regimental commanders exactly why getting surrounded at Bastogne would destroy the German offensive. What happened in the next 8 days would prove McAuliffe right, would shatter Germany's last armoured reserve in the West, and would turn an apparent catastrophe into one of the most decisive American victories of World War II. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The German offensive had begun 6 days earlier, December 16th, 1944, 0530 hours. 1,600 German artillery pieces opened fire simultaneously along an 80-kilometre front in the Ardennes forest. The bombardment lasted 90 minutes. Then came the tanks. 3 German armies, 24 divisions, over 400,000 men. They smashed through a sector held by 4 exhausted or inexperienced American divisions. The 106th Infantry Division, green troops who had been in combat for less than a week. The 28th Infantry Division, veterans still recovering from the brutal Hurtgen Forest campaign, where they had lost 6,000 men in November. The German attack achieved complete tactical surprise. American intelligence had failed to detect the build-up. Ultra-intercepts had provided no warning because the Germans maintained strict radio silence. Aerial reconnaissance was hampered by terrible weather. Ground patrols reported increased activity, but higher command dismissed these reports as nervous imagination. The first American unit destroyed was the 106th Infantry Division on December 17th. They had been holding the Schnee Eifel, a ridge along the German border. The division had arrived in this, supposedly quiet sector just 5 days earlier for seasoning. On December 16th at 0530, the Germans hit them with that massive artillery barrage. Then 3 German divisions attacked. The 106th got surrounded, cut off, overrun within 48 hours. Approximately 8,000 Americans surrendered on December 19th. It was the largest mass surrender of United States forces in Europe during the entire war. The speed of the collapse shocked Allied command. These were not cowards or incompetent soldiers. They were simply in the wrong place, spread too thin, attacked by overwhelming force from multiple directions simultaneously. The second disaster came at the town of Clairvaux on December 17th. The 28th Infantry Division was holding defensive positions along Skyline Drive, a ridge road overlooking the Our River. The 2nd Panzer Division, 120 tanks and 16,000 men, attacked straight into their positions. The 28th fought building to building for 2 days. They held the town of Hosingen until December 18th. They held Marnach all day on the 16th, forcing the Germans to commit tanks much earlier than planned. At Clairvaux itself, the defenders held for 2 full days against the 2nd Panzer Division's entire weight, but the cost was catastrophic. The 110th Infantry Regiment of the 28th Division suffered 2,750 casualties in 2.5 days. The regiment was effectively destroyed as a combat unit, but their sacrifice bought time. Critical time. Almost 2 full days of delay that the Germans could not afford. Because Hitler's plan required speed above everything else, the German objective was the Belgian port of Antwerp, 130 kilometers to the northwest. The plan called for German armoured spearheads to reach the Meuse River by December 19th, just 3 days after the offensive began. Then, cross the Meuse, drive to Antwerp, split the Allied armies, and force the Western Allies to negotiate a separate peace. It was Germany's last gamble. Hitler had scraped together every available reserve, 16-year-old boys and 50-year-old men pressed into service. Veteran divisions pulled from the Eastern Front, every operational tank and assault gun collected. This was not just another offensive. This was Germany's final attempt to avoid total defeat, and everything depended on capturing road networks quickly. The Ardennes was densely forested, mountainous terrain. Cross-country movement for mechanized forces was nearly impossible in winter. The German panzers needed roads. Hard-surfaced roads that could support the weight of 50-ton tanks and the endless supply convoys that would have to follow. 7 major roads converged on one town, Bastogne, a market town of 4,000 people that sat at the centre of the entire Ardennes road network. North-south roads, east-west roads, all running through this single Belgian town, 43 miles south of Liège. Control Bastogne, control movement through the southern Ardennes. Without Bastogne, the German offensive would have to funnel through secondary roads, forest tracks, routes that could not support the weight of traffic a major offensive required. The German planners knew this. General Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding the 5th Panzer Army, told his corps commanders before the attack that Bastogne must be taken. Otherwise it would remain, in his words, an abscess on German lines of communication. General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, recognized the danger immediately. On December 17th, with reports flooding in about German breakthroughs, Eisenhower ordered the 101st Airborne Division to move from their rest area near Reims, France, to Bastogne. The division had been recovering from 3 months of continuous combat in Holland during Operation Market Garden. They had taken heavy casualties at Eindhoven, at Veghel, at the island between the rivers. Many of the men were on leave in Paris. The division commander, Major General Maxwell Taylor, was in Washington attending staff conferences. The assistant division commander, Brigadier General Gerald Higgins, was in England. That left Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, the division artillery commander, in temporary command. McAuliffe was not supposed to be commanding an airborne division in what would become the biggest battle on the Western Front. He was an artilleryman, born in Washington, District of Columbia, on July 2, 1898. He had attended West Virginia University before entering West Point in 1917. His class underwent an accelerated program because of World War I, graduating in November 1918 just as that war ended. For 25 years, McAuliffe had served in various artillery positions, a competent officer, steadily climbing ranks, but unremarkable. Just another artillery officer among thousands. World War II changed everything. He had jumped into Normandy with the 101st on D-Day, commanding the division artillery. When Brigadier General Don Pratt was killed during the glider landings, McAuliffe became Assistant Division Commander. He had proven himself under fire in Normandy and again in Holland. And now, through circumstances beyond anyone's control, the defence of Bastogne rested on his shoulders. 46 years old, an artilleryman commanding paratroopers, facing 3 German panzer divisions. The 101st started arriving in Bastogne late on December 18th, after a brutal 107-mile truck ride through freezing rain and snow. The journey itself was a nightmare. Men packed into open trucks with no room to sit, standing for hours in freezing darkness. Some trucks broke down and had to be abandoned. Others skidded off icy roads. They passed retreating American units heading the opposite direction. Defeated troops warning them to turn back, that the Germans had Tigers and Panthers, entire divisions. The paratroopers ignored them and pressed forward. They arrived without proper winter clothing. The division had been resting, refitting, expecting to spend Christmas in camp. Many men lacked overcoats, winter boots, or adequate gloves. They wore summer uniforms with field jackets, jump boots that would freeze solid in the coming days, thin gloves that offered no protection against frostbite. Some men wrapped their feet in burlap sacks. Others stuffed newspapers inside their jackets for insulation. They had been told this would be a short deployment, a few days at most. Stop the Germans, hand over to relieving units, return to camp. No one expected to be surrounded. No one expected what was about to happen. Major General Troy Middleton commanded 8th Corps, the American formation responsible for this sector. His headquarters was in Bastogne. On December 19th, when McAuliffe arrived, Middleton was preparing to evacuate south as German forces closed in from multiple directions. The sound of artillery fire was getting closer by the hour. Middleton met with McAuliffe in the Hotel Lebrun. The meeting was brief, almost hurried. Middleton's staff was burning documents, loading trucks, preparing to withdraw. German armor was reported 10 kilometers away and moving fast. Middleton explained the situation with brutal honesty. 3 German divisions, maybe 4, were converging on Bastogne from multiple directions. American units were scattered across the countryside, some destroyed, some retreating in disorder, some still holding but isolated. The road network was collapsing. Within hours, maybe a day at most, Bastogne would be completely surrounded. Middleton had already sent what forces he had available to delay the Germans. Combat Command B of the 10th Armoured Division under Colonel William Roberts had arrived the day before. Roberts had split his force into 3 task forces, each named after its commander. Team de Sobry, under Major William de Sobry, was sent north to the village of Neuville to block the 2nd Panzer Division. Team Cherry, under Lieutenant Colonel Henry Cherry, was sent east toward Longville to slow Panzer Lehr Division. Team O'Hara, under Lieutenant Colonel James O'Hara, was sent southeast to cover another approach route. These were not large forces. Each task force had perhaps 400 men, a dozen tanks, some tank destroyers, but they were all Middleton had, and they bought critical time. At Neuville on December 19th and 20th, Team de Sobry, reinforced by elements of the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment, held off the entire 2nd Panzer Division for 36 hours. 16,000 Germans, with over 120 tanks, attacking 400 Americans with 15 Sherman tanks and a handful of M18 Hellcat tank destroyers. The fighting was brutal. Close-range tank battles in fog, snow. The M18s, with their high-velocity 76mm guns, destroyed at least 30 German tanks. The Germans finally forced the Americans to withdraw on December 20th, but the delay cost the 2nd Panzer 2 full days and heavy casualties. By the time they cleared Neuville, the 101st Airborne had established defensive positions around Bastogne. Team Cherry at Longville got surrounded and largely destroyed, but not before causing more delays and destroying several German vehicles. Team O'Hara at Warden fought from December 19th through December 22nd, conducting a fighting withdrawal that further slowed German advances. These small unit actions, desperate defensive stands by outnumbered forces, bought the hours that McAuliffe needed to position the 101st around Bastogne's perimeter. Middleton told McAuliffe he needed the 101st to hold Bastogne long enough for other forces to organize a counterattack. McAuliffe asked how long. Middleton said he did not know. Maybe 3 days. Maybe a week. Maybe until they all died. McAuliffe said they would hold. Then Middleton said something that McAuliffe would remember clearly decades later. Middleton said, "Don't worry about getting surrounded. If they surround you, you'll have them right where you want them. At the time, McAuliffe thought that was command optimism, the kind of thing officers say to keep morale up when the situation looks desperate. But 3 hours later, after surveying the terrain around Bastogne and studying the road network carefully, McAuliffe realized Middleton was absolutely right. Getting surrounded at Bastogne was not a disaster, it was an opportunity. December 19th, 1400 hours. McAuliffe gathered his regimental commanders in a basement in Bastogne. Lieutenant Colonel Julian Ewell, commanding the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Chapwis, commanding the 502nd. Colonel Robert Sink, commanding the 506th. Colonel Joseph Harper, commanding the 327th Glider Infantry, plus Colonel William Roberts from 10th Armoured, the artillery commanders, the staff officers. The room was crowded, cold, lit by one bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. McAuliffe spread a map on the wooden table. Bastogne sat at the centre where 7 roads converged like spokes on a wheel. Everything in the Ardennes road network ran through this town, north to south, east to west. You could not move large mechanized forces without using Bastogne's roads. McAuliffe pointed at the map and explained what was about to happen and why it would work in American favour. His voice was calm, matter-of-fact, as he laid out the tactical reality. The Germans need these roads more than we do. Their entire offensive depends on speed. They have maybe 4 days to reach the Meuse River before we can bring enough forces to stop them. Kilometres through terrible terrain in winter. They cannot do it cross-country with armour. They need the roads. All the roads run through here, he continued, his finger tracing routes on the map. Right now, the German Panzer divisions are racing west, trying to bypass us. 2nd Panzer Division to the north, Panzer Lehr to the south. They want to leave us behind, let the infantry divisions deal with us later. But they cannot, because every ton of supplies, every litre of fuel, every ammunition truck for their spearhead divisions has to come through this road network, and we are sitting on it. McAuliffe leaned forward, his hands flat on the map. When they surround us, they are not trapping us, they are committing forces to hold us in place, forces that should be racing west. Every tank they put around our perimeter is a tank that is not reaching the Meuse. Every artillery battery they position to attack us is artillery that is not supporting their advance. And once they commit those forces, they cannot easily pull them back because we are behind their lines causing problems. He paused, letting that sink in. The officers around the table were listening intently now, beginning to see what he saw. More importantly, when they surround us, they concentrate their forces into a fixed position around a known objective, our objective. They will be attacking the same targets repeatedly from the same directions. We know where they will come from because we control the town, and they have to come down the roads to reach us. They are mechanized. They need the roads. McAuliffe's tactical analysis was brilliant in its simplicity. We can prepare defensive positions, pre-register our artillery on every likely avenue of approach, position our anti-tank weapons exactly where we need them, and when they attack, they will be attacking into prepared defences from predictable directions, with their supply lines stretched behind them, running back through terrain we can harass with patrols. They will have to protect their flanks, guard their rear, defend their supply routes. Meanwhile, once our reinforcements break through, we are already positioned in the perfect place, right in their rear, cutting their supply lines permanently. Lieutenant Colonel Ewell asked the question everyone was thinking. What happens if the reinforcements do not break through? McAuliffe looked at him directly. Then we all die, but the Germans will not reach the Meuse either, because they will have wasted too much time and too much combat power trying to take this town. Either way, the offensive fails. The question is whether we survive to see it. The briefing ended. The officers left to position their units. McAuliffe understood the plan intellectually, but emotionally it still felt wrong. Every instinct said getting surrounded meant getting destroyed. But Middleton had made one point McAuliffe could not argue with. In 2 days, he had watched 2 American divisions get destroyed, fighting the wrong way. The 106th got overrun because they were spread out trying to defend everything, and defended nothing. The 28th got crushed because they tried to hold towns that did not matter strategically. And defending one town with concentrated forces was better than defending 100 kilometers of line with scattered units that could not support each other. December 20th, noon. The Germans closed the ring, all 7 highways cut. Bastogne was completely surrounded. The perimeter was not circular or neat. It followed terrain, used villages as strongpoints, covered approximately 26 kilometers of defensive positions, manned by approximately 18,000 American troops. The defensive scheme worked because McAuliffe understood what the Germans would do. They would probe for weak spots, find one, concentrate forces, try to break through to the center of town. But the American defense was not trying to hold every meter of ground. It was designed to absorb attacks, channel them into kill zones, destroy them with firepower. Ground could be given up temporarily as long as the defense maintained coherence and the artillery kept firing. The 501st Parachute Infantry under Lieutenant Colonel Ewell held the eastern perimeter from the railroad near Luzery southeast to Marvy. The 506th under Colonel Sink held from the railroad northeast to Foy. The 502nd under Lieutenant Colonel Chapwis covered the northwestern sector from Foy to Hemrule. The 327th Glider Infantry under Colonel Harper had the longest, thinnest line, running from the 502nd's left flank all the way around south to Marvy. Behind all of them, positioned centrally, 3 battalions of 155mm howitzers, commanded by Colonel Thomas Sherburne. The artillery could fire in any direction, had pre-registered fire concentrations on every likely German avenue of approach. When infantry commanders called for fire, the shells arrived in minutes, landing exactly where needed. The mobile reserve consisted of about 40 tanks from Combat Command B of the 10th Armoured Division, survivors from the teams that had delayed the Germans outside Bastogne. These tanks were now regrouped and positioned centrally where they could respond to any breakthrough attempt. The first German probe came at 1500 hours on December 20th. A company of infantry from the 26th Volksgrenadiers Division advancing up the road from the south toward positions held by the 327th Glider Infantry. The Americans let them approach to 200 meters, then opened fire, machine guns, rifles, mortars. The attack broke in 8 minutes. The Germans pulled back, leaving 32 bodies on the road. American casualties from that engagement: 3 men wounded, 1 seriously. They had stopped a German company with 3 casualties because the Germans had to come straight up the road into prepared positions. McAuliffe, monitoring the radio traffic from his command post, started to see what Middleton meant. The second attack came at 1730 hours. Heavier this time, 2 companies with tank support, 6 Mark V Panther tanks advancing on the 501st sector near Neffe. They made it to 150 meters before American anti-tank guns opened fire. M18 Hellcats from the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion. 3 tanks destroyed in 90 seconds. The others pulled back. The infantry retreated. American casualties: 5 wounded, 1 Hellcat damaged. German casualties: estimated 80 killed, 3 tanks destroyed. The attack was completely stopped, and the Germans had not learned anything useful about American positions because they had all died or run before they could report back effectively. Tomorrow, they would likely come at the same place, the same way. And the Americans would be ready again. By December 21st, McAuliffe realized the defense of Bastogne was not about holding ground. It was about destroying German units faster than they could be replaced. Every failed attack cost the Germans men and equipment they could not afford to lose. Every hour they spent attacking Bastogne was an hour their spearhead divisions were not advancing west. The Germans were bleeding themselves against fixed defences while accomplishing nothing strategically. But the real problem was supplies. Bastogne had been a supply depot, but most of the stocks had been evacuated south before the Germans surrounded the town. The 101st arrived with minimal ammunition, almost no medical supplies, limited food. By December 21st, ammunition was rationed. Artillery was limited to 10 rounds per gun per day. Automatic weapons were restricted to short, aimed bursts. Every shot had to count because there were not many shots left. Food was worse. The division had brought approximately 2 days of K rations. By December 21st, the men were on half rations. By December 22nd, quarter rations. Temperatures stayed below freezing. Men were hungry, cold, exhausted. Most did not have winter uniforms. They wore every piece of clothing they could scavenge, from abandoned positions, from casualties, from civilians who had fled the town. Medical supplies were nearly gone. The division's main medical company had been captured on December 19th, when a German patrol overran the division service area south of Bastogne. Most of the surgeons, most of the medical equipment, most of the morphine, all captured in one raid. The division aid stations were operating with whatever supplies they had grabbed before leaving their rest camp in France. It was not enough. Wounded men died from treatable injuries because there were not enough medical supplies to treat them properly. Frostbite cases overwhelmed the few remaining medics. Men's feet swelled so badly from the cold that boots had to be cut open to prevent gangrene. On December 22nd at 1100 hours, 4 German officers approached the American lines under a white flag near the 327th Glider Infantry Sector. They carried a message from General der Panzertruppen Heinrich Freiherr von Luttwitz, commanding 47th Panzer Corps. The message was typed on 2 sheets of paper, one in English, one in German. It demanded surrender. The message stated that American forces were surrounded, outnumbered, cut off from supply. That honourable surrender was the only way to avoid total annihilation. That the German commander was granting 2 hours for consideration of this proposal. If the proposal was rejected, the message claimed, 1 German artillery corps and 6 heavy anti-aircraft battalions were ready to annihilate the American troops in and near Bastogne. The order for firing would be given immediately after the 2-hour deadline expired. All the serious civilian losses caused by this artillery fire, the message warned, would not correspond with well-known American humanity. The message was brought to McAuliffe's command post. He read it, crumpled it into a ball, threw it in a wastebasket, and muttered one word, "Nuts." Then he walked out to visit some units on the western perimeter to congratulate them for eliminating a German roadblock earlier that morning. As far as he was concerned, the German demand did not deserve a response. The Germans were taking a hell of a beating, and they wanted the Americans to surrender. It was absurd. But the Germans were waiting for an answer. They had come under a flag of truce with a formal written demand. Military protocol required some kind of response. When McAuliffe returned to headquarters an hour later, his staff was discussing what to say. Someone suggested a formal military response outlining why surrender was not an option. Someone else suggested explaining the tactical situation. Lieutenant Colonel Harry Kinnard, the division operations officer, had a different idea. McAuliffe wondered aloud. "Well, I do not know what to tell them," Kinnard said. "What you said initially would be hard to beat." McAuliffe asked. "What do you mean?" Kinnard said. "Sir, you said nuts." McAuliffe grabbed a piece of paper and wrote in his own hand, "To the German commander." "Nuts." "The American commander." He handed it to a clerk and said, "Have it typed up." The typed response was given to Colonel Joseph Harper, commander of the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment. Harper would deliver it personally to the German officers who were still waiting blindfolded in the woods adjacent to the American lines. Harper took Private First Class Ernest Premetz with him as an interpreter. When they reached the German officers, Harper handed the message to the blindfolded Major Wagner, putting it directly in his hand. The German, Lieutenant Helmuth Henke, asked if the reply was written or verbal. Harper said it was written. Henke asked about the contents of the message, because if it was affirmative, they were authorized to negotiate further. Harper said, "The reply consists of a single word, nuts." Henke, not understanding American slang, asked, "Is that reply negative or affirmative?" Harper replied, "The reply is decidedly not affirmative." He added, "If you continue this foolish attack, your losses will be tremendous." Henke translated for Wagner. The major nodded slowly. The 2 blindfolded German officers were then driven by a roundabout route back to their entry point. There, the blindfolds were removed. The Germans opened the message and looked at it, clearly confused. They asked what it meant. Harper and Premetz discussed how to explain American slang to Germans who did not understand. Premetz finally said in German, "Du kannst zum Teufel gehen." Harper said, "If you continue to attack, we will kill every goddamn German that tries to break into this city." Henke replied, "We will kill many Americans. This is war." Harper responded, "We will kill many Germans." And, "Good luck to you." After Henke translated, the major acknowledged with a stiff nod. They saluted. The Germans started to walk away. As they departed, one of the German officers threw down his blindfold in apparent frustration. The German party returned to their lines at 1400 hours. They drove first to the 901st Panzer Grenadier Regiment headquarters, then to Panzer Lehr Division headquarters, about a mile further south. General Heinrich von Luttwitz, commander of 47th Panzer Corps, happened to be at the Panzer Lehr headquarters when they arrived. When Major Wagner and Lieutenant Henke presented the American reply, Luttwitz could not believe it. He had been confident the Americans would surrender. He had already prepared to march into Bastogne as a victor. Instead, he received a one-word message he did not even understand. The massive artillery barrage promised in the surrender demand never materialized. Luttwitz had been bluffing, trying to intimidate the Americans into surrendering without a fight. When the bluff was called, he had nothing. The 6 heavy anti-aircraft battalions, mentioned in the ultimatum, did not exist in positions around Bastogne. Much of the heavy artillery had already been moved forward past Bastogne to support the drive toward the Meuse. Word of McAuliffe's response spread through the American lines within hours. Soldiers who had been on the edge of despair suddenly found new energy. If the general thought the situation was nuts, not desperate, then maybe they could hold out. If the commanding general could tell the Germans to go to hell when surrounded and outnumbered 3-1, then by God they could keep fighting. The story grew with each telling. Some said McAuliffe had torn up the surrender demand. Others claimed he had used much stronger language than nuts, but everyone understood the message. No surrender. Not now. Not ever. The effect on German morale was equally significant but opposite. German soldiers had been told the Americans in Bastogne were finished, that surrender was inevitable. The offensive depended on speed, on crushing resistance quickly and moving on. Every day Bastogne held was another day the German timetable slipped, another day for Allied reinforcements to arrive, another day closer to the weather clearing and Allied aircraft returning. When word spread that the Americans had rejected the surrender demand with a single incomprehensible word, German soldiers began to wonder what kind of enemy they were facing. Experienced German tank commanders who had fought across Russia and France knew when an enemy was ready to break. The Americans in Bastogne should have been ready to break. Surrounded, outnumbered, no air support, limited supplies, terrible weather. But they had not surrendered. They had responded with a word that, even when translated, made no tactical sense. This psychological dimension of warfare proved crucial. The side that believes it will win has an enormous advantage over the side that begins to doubt. The weather cleared on December 23rd. For the first time in a week, the sun broke through the clouds. Within hours, C-47 transport planes appeared over Bastogne, dropping supplies by parachute. Medical supplies, ammunition, food, winter clothing floated down into the American perimeter. 241 planes dropped 144 tons of supplies. Not enough to solve all problems, but enough to keep fighting. More importantly, the clear weather meant Allied fighter bombers could return. P-47 Thunderbolts roared over German positions, dropping bombs, firing rockets, strafing anything that moved. German tanks that had been painted, green and brown for summer operations, stood out clearly against the snow. The P-47s dove in streams, attacking with devastating effect. McAuliffe watched from an observation post as 6 German tanks burned in 20 minutes. The Germans tried to pull their armour back, but the narrow roads through the forest made manoeuvring difficult. More tanks destroyed, more vehicles burning, more German infantry caught in the open by strafing runs. By afternoon of December 23rd, the German attacks had stopped, not because they had given up, but because operating in daylight under American air superiority was suicide. They would have to wait for darkness, attack at night when the aircraft could not see them. But night attacks are harder, require better coordination, achieve less surprise against defenders who know they are coming. The air support changed the psychological dynamic completely. McAuliffe's men had spent 4 days surrounded, outnumbered, wondering if anyone was coming to help. The aircraft proved someone was coming. The airdrops proved they were not forgotten. The fighter bombers proved the Germans did not own the battlefield anymore. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. German morale went the opposite direction. They had been attacking prepared defences for 4 days, losing men and equipment, making no progress. Now they could not even operate in daylight without being destroyed from the air. December 25th, 0300 hours, Christmas morning. The Germans launched their main assault on the western perimeter. The 15th Panzer Grenadier Division just arrived from Germany as reinforcements, supported by elements of the 26th Volksgrenadier Division. The attack came out of darkness, aimed at the villages of Chance and Hemrul, trying to break through to the centre of Bastogne. The German infantry hit the freight ARP 3, 27th Glider, infantry at 0330, approximately 2 regiments, maybe 4,000 men with tank support. The attack achieved initial surprise, penetrated the American line, got German tanks into Hemrul. McAuliffe, awakened by the sound of firing, rushed to his operations centre and began coordinating the defence. The American response took apart the German attack systematically. The penetration exposed the German tanks to fire from multiple directions. American tank destroyers positioned in depth engaged from the flanks. Artillery, pre-registered on the approach routes, dropped concentrations that broke up the following infantry. The German advance stopped 600 metres inside the perimeter. The tanks could not push forward without infantry support. The infantry could not advance through the artillery fire. At 0800 hours, McAuliffe ordered counterattacks from adjacent units, room-to-room fighting in Hemrul, grenades through windows, close-range firefights in the streets. By noon, the Germans were pulling back. All the tanks that had penetrated were destroyed or abandoned. The infantry retreated to their start lines. American casualties, approximately 300 men. German casualties, estimated 1,500, plus 18 tanks destroyed. The Christmas attack was the Germans' best chance to take Bastogne. They had thrown everything available at one section of line, achieved surprise, penetrated the defences, and it had not worked. The concentrated American defence, the pre-planned artillery fires, the defence in depth, all of it worked exactly as McAuliffe had planned. The Germans attacked into a kill zone and got destroyed. December 26th, 1650 hours. Lieutenant Charles Bogues, commanding a tank platoon with the 37th Tank Battalion, 4th Armoured Division, crashed through the German lines south of Bastogne near the village of Assenoir and made contact with American engineers of the 326th Airborne Engineer Battalion. McAuliffe, informed by radio, rushed forward to meet the relief column. The siege was over. The road was open. Supplies poured in. Wounded were evacuated. The Germans pulled back from the immediate perimeter, but did not abandon the siege completely. They still held positions around Bastogne, still controlled the surrounding terrain. The encirclement was broken, but the battle was not over. Fighting would continue for another 3 weeks. What the Germans did not realize was that they had already lost, not just the battle for Bastogne, but the entire offensive. By concentrating forces against Bastogne for 8 days, they had destroyed their own timetable. The spearhead divisions never reached the Meuse. They ran out of fuel, out of time, out of momentum. The German perspective reveals how completely Bastogne destroyed their offensive. Lieutenant General Heinrich von Leutwitz commanded 47th Panzer Corps with 3 elite divisions, 2nd Panzer, Panzer Lehr, and 26th Volksgrenadiers. On December 17th, he was confident the breakthrough would succeed. His orders were simple. Take Bastogne quickly, or bypass it. Do not get bogged down. The Meuse River at Dinant was 80 kilometers west. Speed was everything. But on December 19th, intelligence confirmed American airborne forces had occupied Bastogne overnight. Von Lüttwitz made the fatal decision to surround the town while his panzers continued west. By December 21st, he realized his mistake. Americans in Bastogne were launching patrols, ambushing supply convoys, calling artillery on German positions. They were not contained. They were deadly. Higher command demanded results. The offensive was behind schedule. Von Lüttwitz sent the surrender demand on December 22nd. McAuliffe's response, nuts, meant committing major forces to assault Bastogne, forces desperately needed elsewhere. December 23rd. Weather cleared. Von Lüttwitz watched helplessly as American aircraft dropped supplies to Bastogne while fighter bombers destroyed his tanks. His green and brown camouflaged panzers stood out against white snow like targets. The Luftwaffe could do nothing. Germany's air force was destroyed. 2nd Panzer Division raced west, reaching within 5 kilometers of the Meuse by December 22nd. Then their fuel ran out. Supply trucks could not get through because Bastogne controlled the roads. By December 26th, 2nd Panzer's spearhead was surrounded at Schelles. Major von Kochenhausen abandoned his tanks and led 600 men on foot back to German lines. 100 tanks left behind, all captured. The accounting was staggering. 2nd Panzer entered battle with 120 tanks and 16,000 men. By January 5, 1945, 28 tanks, 8,000 men remained. Panzer Lehr started with 57 tanks and 15,000 men, ended with 17 tanks, 7,000 men. 26th Volksgrenadier lost 10,000 of 17,000 men. 15th Panzergrenadier lost 60% of its strength in 1 week. Total German casualties around Bastogne. Over 20,000 killed, wounded, missing. Over 200 tanks destroyed or abandoned. For Germany, these losses were irreplaceable. The panzer divisions that could have defended the Rhine River in March were gone, wrecked at Bastogne. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. American casualties totaled 3,000 men at Bastogne, but unlike Germans, American losses could be replaced. McAuliffe became famous for nuts, promoted to Major General on January 3, 1945. After the war, he rose to 4-star general, commanding United States Army Europe. He died August 10, 1975, buried at Arlington. The Germans thought they were besieging Bastogne. Actually, Bastogne was besieging them, fixing German divisions where American firepower could destroy them. The trap worked backward. By the time Germans realized it, they had lost 5 to 7 divisions and any chance of reaching the Meuse. One word did not win the war, but one word at the right moment helped ensure victory. McAuliffe said nuts. Americans held, Germans failed. History was made. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.